Time travel is something we usually see only in movies. But what if some people have actually experienced it? Across history, there have been strange cases. People appearing in the wrong time, knowing things they shouldn't, or disappearing without reason. These stories blur the line between science and the impossible. In this video, we'll explore 5 real and chilling time travel cases that still have no clear explanation. It was August 10, 1901, in Versailles, France. 2 English women, Charlotte Anne Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, were on a short trip from Paris. Both were well-educated academics. Moberly was the first principal of St. Hugh's College at Oxford, and Jourdain was her assistant. They had been touring France that summer, visiting historical places and getting to know each other before working together at the college. That morning, they decided to visit the Palace of Versailles. They expected a quiet tour, nothing unusual. But what started as a simple day trip would turn into one of the strangest mysteries in modern history. After exploring the main palace, both women found it dull and lifeless. Moberly suggested they walk through the gardens to visit the Petit Trianon, a small estate once used by Queen Marie Antoinette. The weather was cloudy and the air felt heavy as they walked with their travel guidebook in hand. When they saw the Grand Trianon was closed, they turned down a smaller path, and that's when things began to feel wrong. The light dimmed even though the clouds hadn't changed. The air grew silent, and the world around them felt still, almost like a painted scene. Both women later said the atmosphere became heavy and unnatural. They noticed people ahead, but none looked modern. A woman stood in an upstairs window, shaking a white cloth, moving stiffly, as if in slow motion. 2 men dressed in old-fashioned green-gray coats and 3-cornered hats stood by a cart. They looked at the women but didn't seem surprised. One spoke politely in French, pointing them toward another path. Farther along, they saw a small cottage where a woman and child stood motionless, dressed as if from the 1700s. Jourdain said they looked real but lifeless, like figures in a museum. Moberly said the air felt thick, as if she were walking underwater. Near a small garden kiosk, they saw a man wearing a cloak and a large hat. His face was scarred and angry, and his presence terrified them. But before they could turn away, another man appeared, well-dressed and calm, telling them in French to cross a nearby bridge. They followed him. As they crossed, Moberly noticed a woman sitting on the grass sketching. She wore a long white dress with a green sash and an old-style hat. Her hair was arranged like women from the 1700s. The woman briefly looked up, then went back to drawing. Moberly later believed this could have been Marie Antoinette herself, though Jourdain never saw her. Moments later, the stillness vanished. The sounds of laughter and rustling leaves returned. Everything felt normal again. A week later, while writing a letter, Moberly mentioned the strange day to Jourdain. Both realized they had sensed the same eerie feeling, though they noticed different details. Months later in Oxford, they compared notes. Each wrote their own account first, and their stories matched closely. They studied old maps of Versailles and were surprised that certain features they described, like the bridge and layout, matched how the gardens looked more than a century earlier. Some of those details no longer existed. They began to wonder if they had somehow witnessed the past. In 1911, they published their account under pseudonyms as an adventure. The book gained huge attention. Some readers believed it was a true paranormal event or a time slip. Others said it was imagination or confusion. Skeptics argued they might have wandered into a private costume event. Later research suggested their memories may have changed over time, growing more detailed. Psychologists thought the experience could have been caused by stress or fatigue. Still, both women insisted the story was real. Moberly lived until 1937 and Jourdain until 1924. Their true identities were revealed in 1931. To this day, the Moberly-Jourdain incident, also called the Ghosts of Versailles, remains one of the most famous unexplained events ever recorded. 2 scholars walked through the gardens of Versailles, and for a few moments it seemed like they stepped into another century. It was the summer of 1935 in Scotland. Sir Robert Victor Goddard, a respected officer in the Royal Air Force, was on what should have been a routine flight, one that would soon become one of aviation's strangest mysteries. Born in 1897 in Wembley, England, Goddard had served through both World Wars and was known for his intelligence, discipline, and precision. But what happened that day over a forgotten airfield would defy everything he understood about the world. At the time, Goddard was a wing commander. His task was to inspect airfields across Britain. That day, he was flying from Andover, England to Edinburgh, Scotland, a route that passed over a small abandoned field near the village of Drem. Built during World War I, the Drem airfield had long been deserted. The hangars were decaying, the runways cracked, and cattle grazed where planes once stood. When Goddard flew over it, it looked like nothing more than farmland. After completing his inspection in Edinburgh, Goddard began flying back to Andover. But as he approached Drem again, the weather changed fast. A powerful storm rolled in, with yellowish-brown clouds and violent winds that shook his biplane. He tried to climb above the storm, But it only grew worse. The plane spun in turbulence, and for a moment, he thought it was the end. Then, just as suddenly, the storm cleared. Bright sunlight broke through, and Goddard saw land below. He realized he was flying directly over Drem again, but it looked completely different. The airfield that had been abandoned hours earlier was now active and new. The hangars looked rebuilt, the runways spotless, and 4 planes stood neatly lined up, each painted bright yellow. That was impossible. In 1935, Royal Air Force planes were silver, never yellow. Goddard recognized 3 of the aircraft as standard biplanes, but one was a monoplane design he had never seen before. On the ground, he saw mechanics working calmly, dressed in blue uniforms instead of the brown ones Royal Air Force ground crews normally wore. Before he could make sense of it, the storm swallowed his plane again. When he finally landed safely in Andover, he was shaken and confused. His fellow officers dismissed his story as an illusion caused by fatigue or bad weather. Goddard stopped talking about it for years. Then 4 years later, in 1939, the airfield at Drem was reactivated for World War II, and everything matched what he had described. The planes were now painted yellow, the mechanics wore blue, and the Royal Air Force had introduced a new monoplane model, the Miles Magister, identical to the one he had seen in 1935. It was as if he had looked 4 years into the future. People now call this kind of event a time slip, a moment where someone briefly experiences another point in time. Many dismiss it as a coincidence or imagination, but every detail Goddard mentioned became true. Sir Victor Goddard wasn't an ordinary pilot. He was one of Britain's most respected airmen, later serving as Air Marshal and earning major honors for his leadership in the Pacific. He was known for logic, not superstition. That's why his story stood out. It simply didn't fit with the man he was. Years later, while flying in 1946, another strange event occurred. A fellow officer had dreamed that Goddard's plane would crash on a pebbled beach surrounded by mountains. That night, Goddard's flight to Tokyo iced over, forcing an emergency landing on a beach just like the dream described. Everyone survived, but the coincidence was eerie. Goddard lived a long life after retiring in 1951. He wrote books exploring the mysteries of time and reality, believing that under rare conditions, people might experience moments from the past or future. Skeptics argued that stress or confusion explained his vision, but none could account for how his exact details came true. Throughout his final years, Goddard never changed his account. He maintained that during that 1935 flight, he had briefly seen the future. Nearly a century later, the Drem airfield incident remains one of the most baffling stories in aviation, when one man's short flight through a storm may have crossed the boundaries of time itself. It was early 1995 in Stanbury, Missouri. A 21-year-old electrical engineering student named Mike Markham had a strange dream: to build a time machine. He wasn't trying to explore history or meet people from the future. He just wanted to see future lottery numbers and use them to become rich. But what began as a small idea would soon turn into one of the most mysterious stories ever linked to time travel. Mike wasn't a scientist. He was an ordinary man with a strong interest in electronics. He often spent hours experimenting with wires, transformers, and circuits on his porch. One day, while testing a Jacob's ladder, a device that produces visible electric arcs, he noticed something unusual. He claimed a small circular vortex appeared above it. Curious, he tossed a metal screw into the vortex. The screw vanished and reappeared a few feet away seconds later. Convinced he had created a small-time portal, Mike decided to take his experiment further. But he needed more power and more equipment. The transformers he needed cost around $20,000, far beyond what he could afford. Desperate, Mike broke into the St. Joseph Light and Power Generating Station and took 6 industrial transformers. Soon after, the town experienced power issues. Lights flickered and homes lost electricity. Police traced the outage to Mike's home and found the stolen transformers scattered around his property. He was arrested and told officers he needed them for his time machine project. Mike spent 60 days in jail and was put on probation for 5 years. After his release, he could have stopped, but he didn't. His story spread and reached Art Bell, host of the paranormal radio show Coast to Coast AM. Mike was invited to talk about his project, and his calm explanations made him famous among paranormal enthusiasts. Listeners began calling him Madman Mike. Donations poured in: money, electrical parts, and support from fans. With this, Mike began building a larger machine designed to create an electromagnetic vortex big enough for a person to enter. In 1996, he returned to Coast and said he was about 30 days from finishing a legal version of the time machine. He said he would test it himself, bringing only his phone. Then in 1997, he vanished. No one could reach him. His family and neighbors hadn't seen him. Rumors spread fast. Some said his experiment went wrong. Others believed he had actually traveled through time. A story even surfaced about a body found on a 1930s beach with a strange device, but no record supported it. For years, Mike's name lived on in forums and videos. Many assumed he was gone for good, until 2015. That year, 18 years after disappearing, Mike appeared again on Art Bell's new show, Midnight in the Desert. He said his house had burned down, he'd lost everything and spent time homeless before moving to Hawaii. Despite his struggles, he never gave up on time travel. Mike explained that he had tested his device with hundreds of small objects and animals, claiming they vanished and reappeared moments later. He even said he once stepped into the vortex himself and woke up 800 miles away 2 years later with missing memories. No records confirmed this, but Mike's steady tone made people wonder if he was telling the truth. He disappeared again, but resurfaced in 2022 on Reddit saying he was alive, living in Hawaii and later in Ohio, still working on his project. Police records confirm the transformer theft and the power outage. His radio appearances prove he existed, but beyond that, nothing is certain. Scientists say his machine likely created strong electromagnetic effects, not time travel. Still, his story remains one of the strangest ever told, a tale of obsession, mystery, and the thin line between discovery and delusion. Today, Mike Markham, the man once called Madman Mike, still pursues the same dream he started nearly 30 years ago, chasing the possibility of time travel and leaving behind one of the most fascinating mysteries in modern history. It was November 2nd, 2000, when a user calling himself TimeTravel_0 appeared on an online forum called the Time Travel Institute. His message was simple but strange. He said he was a soldier from the year 2036, stationed in Tampa, Florida, who had traveled back in time to retrieve a 1975 IBM 5100 computer. According to him, the computer was needed in his world to repair broken systems after a global collapse. At first, users thought it was a joke, but as the months passed, this user, who later called himself John Teeter, shared pages of technical notes, predictions, and theories about time travel that sounded unusually detailed. By 2001, thousands of people were reading his posts. Some believed him, others thought it was an elaborate prank. Either way, he had started one of the strangest internet mysteries ever recorded. Teeter's story, however, didn't begin online. Back on July 29, 1998, radio host Art Bell received 2 faxes from someone claiming to be a time traveler from 2034. The messages warned of disaster after the Y2K computer glitch, predicting chaos, government collapse, and countless deaths. Few paid attention until 2 years later, when TimeTravel_0 appeared using the same details. People began to wonder if it was the same person. In his posts, Teeter claimed that time travel was discovered in 2034. He said he worked for a military project and was chosen to retrieve the IBM 5100 because it could run old programming languages that newer machines couldn't. He said this was needed to fix what he called legacy system failures, referencing a real computer issue known as the Unix 2038 problem. He also mentioned that his grandfather had helped design the IBM 5100, making the mission personal. To prove he was genuine, Teeter described hidden features in the computer that were not public knowledge at the time. Years later, IBM engineers confirmed these functions were real, giving his story unexpected credibility. Teeter described a future where the United States was torn apart by internal conflicts starting around 2005. By 2008, he said it had become a full-scale war that split the country into 5 regions. In 2015, a global nuclear conflict, what he called End Day, destroyed major cities like Washington, D.C. and Jacksonville, Florida. By 2036, he said the world had become smaller, rural, and self-sufficient. He shared scientific details too. His time machine, he claimed, was called a C-204 gravity distortion unit, built by General Electric. It supposedly used miniature black holes to bend space and time. He even posted pictures of the machine, saying it was installed in a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette and later moved to a 1987 truck. As people questioned him, Teeter calmly replied to topics about politics, science, and even UFOs, claiming they were travelers from much further in the future. He warned of diseases spreading through beef and said time travel technology came from CERN in Switzerland. Then in March 2001, he made his final post. Bring a gas can with you when your car dies on the side of the road. He never appeared again. Years later, investigators looked for answers. In 2003, the John Teeter Foundation was registered in Florida, led by lawyer Larry Haber and his brother Richard, a computer expert. Both denied involvement, but digital traces pointed back to them. In 2009, researchers suggested the Teeter story was an elaborate online experiment mixing science fiction and reality. In 2018, artist Joseph Matheny claimed he advised its creators, saying it was a literary project meant to test how people would react to a believable internet myth, but he refused to name who was behind it. Despite the investigations, no one has ever proven who John Teeter really was. His story inspired books, documentaries, and even the Japanese series, Steins Gate. Over 20 years later, his last message still lingers online. Whether he was a hoax, an artist, or truly from 2036, John Teeter's mystery continues, caught somewhere between fiction, fear, and belief. It was a warm summer night in 1950 in New York City. Times Square was alive as usual, lights flashing, cars honking, people rushing in every direction. But at around 11:15 p.m., something happened that no one could explain. In the middle of the busy intersection, witnesses claimed they saw a man suddenly appear out of nowhere. He didn't walk up from a corner or get out of a car. He just appeared. The man looked around 29 years old and was dressed like someone from the late 1800s. Long coat, tall boots, and thick sideburns. His clothes were clean and new, but completely out of style. People stared as he looked around in panic, covering his head as if the tall building scared him. Then, before anyone could react, he stepped into the street and was struck by a taxi. He passed away instantly. Police arrived quickly and his body was taken to the morgue. When officers searched his pockets, they found strange things. Inside his coat was a copper beer token worth 5 cents from a bar that no longer existed. There were about $70 in old-style bills, all in perfect condition, but not used for decades. They also found a bill for horse care from a stable that had been gone for years. Everything looked new, yet everything came from another century. There were business cards with the name Rudolph Fentz, a Fifth Avenue address, and a letter addressed to him dated June 1876. Captain Hubert V. Rime from the NYPD Missing Persons Department took the case. He was known for being careful and logical, but this case made no sense. When he went to the address on the card, he found a small business, not a home. The owner had never heard of anyone named Rudolph Fentz. City records turned up nothing. No fingerprints, no missing reports, no relatives. It was as if the man had never existed. Still, Rime kept searching. In a 1939 phone book, he found a listing for a Rudolph Fentz Jr. The man had lived nearby but had moved away in 1940. After checking bank records, Rime discovered Fentz Jr. had passed away a few years earlier, but his wife was still alive in Florida. When he spoke with her, she confirmed something unbelievable. Her husband's father had vanished in 1876 when he was 29 years old after going for an evening walk near Times Square. The description matched perfectly. It seemed impossible, but everything lined up. The clothes, the items, the age. It looked as if the same man had suddenly reappeared in 1950, unchanged. Rime couldn't explain it. Fearing no one would believe him, he closed the case as unresolved. The story might have stayed hidden forever, but in 1972, the Journal of Borderland Research published it as fact, claiming Fentz had walked through a time portal from 1876 to 1950. The story spread worldwide, fueling belief in time travel. Then in 2000, researcher Chris Obeck traced the story's origin. He found no police files or morgue records. Instead, he discovered it came from a 1951 short story by science fiction writer Jack Finney called I'm Scared, published in Collier's magazine. Someone had copied Finney's story years later, removed the fiction label, and presented it as truth. Over time, it turned into a full-blown urban legend. By 2001, Obeck proved that everything, from the taxi incident to the letter, came from Finney's imagination. Finney, who also wrote The Body Snatchers, loved exploring time and reality. Even today, the story of Rudolph Fentz still circulates online. But the truth is clear. Fentz never existed, and no such police case was ever recorded. It all began as fiction, spread as fact, and became legend. Maybe that's why it still haunts people. Not because it proves time travel, but because it shows how easily stories can blur the line between what's real and what's not.